Hey, thank you, Julie. This is so exciting to be here. Let's go ahead and begin with a blessing for Torah study, which is the formula for blessing, and la'asok b'divrei Torah, thanking God for commanding us to be busy with words of Torah, but I like to think of it as la'asok, to soak up the words of Torah. So, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Amen. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So, on. And put my yarmulke on. How about that? Okay. All right. How did that go? Yes? All right. Okay. It didn't save my little, that's fine. It's good enough. Okay, so when we think about the Exodus from Egypt, all right, and we can use the chat here because we only have a half an hour. Actually, now that I'm sharing my screen, I'm not sure that I see the chat, but maybe Julie could help with that. Okay, so when we start thinking about the Exodus from Egypt, I think we pretty much typically think of, oh, the Exodus from, how did the Israelites escape from Egypt? By a strong, a strong hand, a strong arm, strong hand, mighty arm, whatever it is. Yad chazaka uzra nituyah, that God extricated the people of the Israelites out of Egypt, and it was through the plagues, it was through signs, otot, moftim, and that's usually what we focus on. What became interesting to me in looking at the narrative, looking at the beginning of this week's Parsha in connection with last week's Parsha, I was really focused in on what is the game plan? What was the plan before just, plagues didn't just appear, right? We had, something was put into play. God and Moses strategized, okay? And that to me became the most interesting part of the story as I was looking at it this year. Looking at the story of the Exodus from Egypt, not focusing on the plagues, not focusing on Pharaoh hardening his heart, or did God harden his heart, and what is that all about? Not looking so much at the metaphysical idea, but looking at the personal sort of characteristics and values of leadership and growth that we can garner for ourselves, that we can adapt and apply to our own lives, our own leadership skills, right, in our families, in our businesses, in our communities. What are the skills that we can take away from this narrative, actually apply and kind of understand what was at work in planning the Exodus? So I want to just say one more line here, that today is my father's birthday, Hal J. Upbin. He died a year ago, and so it's not his yahrzeit, but it's actually his birthday. And he was had a very keen business acumen. He was a success in his field of business, so I dedicate this shiur in his memory. So leadership values. When we look at the transition from last week's Torah portion to this week's Torah portion, okay, so this part here, right, so what did I call this? I call this the Redemption Playbook, okay, an analysis of Exodus 5:22 through 6:13. 6:13, how awesome is that? It's even just like, it just got very mystically religious, right, with 613 commandments. So I think it may be a coincidence, but they're no coincidences. Okay, so we're looking here at the connection between last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha as we tie together what I have uncovered to be 7 leadership values in these first verses of the Exodus narrative. I don't know how that happens. Okay, so here we have.
That was actually better, Rabbi Upbin.
Yeah?
That was larger text. That was good.
Oh, okay. So I don't know what I did, but hopefully that will stay. So last week's Torah portion ends in the midst of a conversation between Moses and God. Okay, so if you saw the movie, right, or read the book of, the Exodus from Egypt, you know how it goes. God chooses Moses to be the leader, sends Moses on this mission, right, after some back and forth exchange. Moses doesn't really want the job, but he ends up taking it, goes to Pharaoh and says, hey, let my people go. doesn't quite work out. As a reaction to that, Pharaoh increases the labor, reduces the resources, the people are angry. And now look at Moses. Moses comes to God. This is the end of last week's Torah portion. And he says, and I want you to see the bold print here, because I think this is kind of fascinating. When you think about, when you're angry at somebody, when you want to communicate effectively, what are the right words? We're told to use I language. Like, this is how I feel. Look at what Moses does here. He's just ramming it on to God. Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Oh Lord, why did you bring harm upon this people? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has dealt worse with this people, and still you have not delivered your people." I'm not sure those were the right words, and we'll see what comes next. So the Lord says, you soon shall see what I will do to Pharaoh, and he shall let them go because of a greater might. Indeed, because of a greater might, he shall drive the people from the land. Yad chazaka yigarshem me'artso. So the first leadership value that I want to explore together here is, how do we recover from failure? Okay. Moses may or may not have chosen the right words here, right? But clearly Moses failed in his enterprise, right? Aaron didn't even go back to God with Moses. Here's Moses kind of like alone, hanging his head in shame. What have you done to me? You set me up to fail. All right. Moses could have packed his chips and gone home and said, "I'm not doing this." But interestingly enough, he has this idea that maybe he can recover from this failure. He brings it to God. And maybe he could have said different words like, "Hey, I need help. Let's try again. Let's re-strategize." But God, you'll see, helps Moses with that to recover from failure. So leadership value number one, you know what? We all suffer failures in life. And the greatest skill we can learn as leaders is to pick ourselves up, right, and continue on and to try again. Right? So we see this with Moses from the very beginning of this, from last week's Parsha, but beginning in this week's Parsha as well. So I'm going to just give you the game plan just in case we don't have enough time to cover all the material today. The leadership number one in this game plan, right? This is all before the plagues. This is all before anything else happens. Number one, recover from failure. Okay. Number two, we're going to see this in a moment, stay calm. Establish leadership, listen and be present, communicate goals, okay? Spark enthusiasm, and allocate resources. Know who you have on your team, right? And who can do what. So if we run out of time, like, this is your guide in looking at these verses on your own. So leadership value number two. This is where we open up in this week's Torah portion. Vayidaber Elohim el Moshe, Vayidaber elav ani Adonai. On the surface, this is a very straightforward verse. God spoke to Moses and said, "I am the Lord." But the rabbis go crazy with this. And this verse can be broken into two parts. Vayidaber Elohim el Moshe. Vayidaber is associated with harsh words, Rashi says, kind of like chastisement. Elohim is the God of, the God who's the judge. Okay? Vayidaber Elohim el Moshe. So what do we see going on here? You can almost create like an ellipse. God may have been a little bit ticked off by Moses at this point. And what we see here is a bit of a possible explosion by God, but then God, as it were, takes a deep breath and says, "Vayomer elav ani Adonai." Vayomer is the softer kind of communication. Elav ani Adonai. Adonai is the name of God that's associated with compassion, with rachamim. Okay, my email keeps opening up. That is not good. Let me see if I could fix that. Hold on.
We don't see your email. We just see the Safaria kind of larger.
Fantastic. All right, let's keep going. So here is a beautiful text by the Me'ashiloach. Like a person who gets angry at a beloved friend and seeing the friend standing abashed and terrified at the anger immediately starts to try to soothe the friend with kind words. God's anger was really internal and passing. Thus, God immediately changed his words, as it were, and said, "I am God," the Yud He Vav He form of God. And this is considered kind speech. And the name of Adonai, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, signifies a kind of compassion. All right, so leadership value number 2, this comes from, it's really the idea is brought out a little bit more by the Meshiloach here. It's a Hasidic text that God maybe wants to get angry, but leadership value, resist anger because it doesn't help anyone, right? When you're in a position of power to go, ballistic on people. Okay, am I frozen?
Yes, but we can hear you. Well, it looks like we lost Rabbi Upbin for a moment. Hopefully she'll return, but in the meantime,
I'm back.
Oh, hi. Great. I was gonna say we could see if there are questions while you were gone, but glad you're back.
Okay, that's fine. Any questions so far?
Reba says it seems like Moses is angry and frustrated. He followed God's instructions but did not get the desired results.
Yes. All right, good. And I think that's an interesting point because with that frustration, Moses could have walked away, right? But he still goes back to God. And I think that shows a leadership skill on his part, right? That he's willing to be vulnerable. And even though he's angry, to go back to God and say, this wasn't working. I don't love what he said. It doesn't appear that God actually loves what he said either, but we'll see in a moment that God recalibrates in order to put the strategy and the plan into place. Okay, you guys have a lot of comments, and that's okay. I mean, we could go more slowly. We just won't finish. Let's see. Uncertainty. Okay. Right. So stay calm. Was that attribute for God or Moses? Right. This is God now being calm. Because Moses, it doesn't seem like was that calm. But now that we're seeing the strategy unfold in God about staying calm in that moment. Okay. When anger is useful, yes, there are times when anger is useful. Okay. And we're seeing it here. Some anger could be a motivator, but how do we express that anger? Right, is really, I think, a question here. So I'm going to try this going back here. What happens? Redemption. Let's see. All right. Do you see my screen? Do you see the text?
Not yet. It says you started screen sharing.
Okay. Try it again. How about now?
Yes.
Okay. So now we're moving on to the third leadership value in the text, which is establish a name. Right? When you're going before, your company or your board, your audience, who are you? Right? What is your name? How do you describe yourself? How are you known to others? Well, here God is making it clear. In the next verse number 3, verse Gimel, I appeared before Abraham and Isaac and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name Adonai. Okay, I established my covenant with them. All right, but here is the idea. God was to the ancestors as El Shaddai. And the commentators go on to say El Shaddai is the name of the God who promises. The promise is there, but the ancestors did not live to see the fulfillment of the promise. They were all gone. The Israelites now have endured hundreds of years of slavery. And only now God is saying, will my name Adonai, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, right, the tetragrammaton, this name of compassion, be fully known and realized? And you may be asking a question like, hey, well, if I think about the book of Genesis, I'm pretty sure I've seen the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh there. I've seen the name Adonai. So what are you telling me, right? When you see this Yud here, that just signifies it stands for Adonai. Yes, they did know that name, but God is saying that characteristic of the name of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, which is the God that fulfills the promise, that they didn't know. Only you now know, Moses. Only this people will now know, who will see, right, what will become of them, that they will be taken out of Egypt and they will be brought into the promised lands. So establishing one's name as a leader, choosing the right name and living by that name, okay, is what comes next. Leadership number 4. I'm sorry, this there is so much that we could say right now about the names of God. I mean, that is a whole other lesson, a whole other excursus. So if that's raising questions for you, good. There's a lot of text and research that could be done on the names of God and the differences of the characteristics of the name. God is God, right? God doesn't change, but God is known in different ways in different times to different people, even today. Right? We have different associations with God, even though God is God, right? God is one. God does in the Bible have different names, and also through rabbinics. So again, I love to teach that, and maybe I'll have an opportunity to do that another time. So moving on to leadership value number 4 is be present. When you're leading, you don't just get up there on your high horse and talk like I'm doing right now. If we were, had more time, this would be very highly interactive. And I would love to listen and hear more of what you have to say. But in our own lives, taking this value into our lives, to be an effective leader, you have to listen to your constituents, to your clientele, to your family members, whoever it is that you're leading. You need to listen closely to what is it that they need? Where are they? What are their concerns? So God says in this verse hey, Ani shamati et nakat bnei Israel, asher Mitzrayim avadim otam ve'ezkor et briti. I've heard them. I hear you, right? I hear what's happening. There's a text here. I'm going to skip it now. We could look at it later. I love Erica Brown. Dr. Erica Brown is a teacher, modern scholar, and she goes through just sort of leadership values about how you communicate who you are to others. And the most important aspect of leadership, or one of the most important aspects of leadership, is authenticity and presence, really being present to hear what the people before you have to say. Okay, so shamati, right? I've heard. Leadership value number 5 is to communicate strategy. I love this one. This is verses 6 through 8. All right, when you're leading, right, you can't just go out there and live haphazardly and just sort of, when you're running a company, right, you don't just make decisions day to day that have nothing to do with your bottom line. You need your bottom line. In this case, the bottom line is the Exodus. How are we getting there? Communicating that long-term vision, the short-term vision, right? Your plan, and being as specific as possible helps the constituents get on board with what it is that we're doing. So here, God provides the language of the game plan. Okay, what will God do? V'hotzeiti, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti, v'heveti. We know these words. Where do we know them from? Where do we associate these words today? If you, I hope you're thinking this, the Seder, right? The 4 cups of wine that we drink at the Seder represent the 4 languages of redemption, which are these. I will take you out. Okay, I will deliver you. I didn't bold them in English. So I am the Lord your God. I will free you from the labors. I will deliver you from bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I am the Lord, the God who freed you from the labors of Egypt, and I will bring you to the land. So the 5th word of redemption is veheveti, and that is also associated at the Seder with the 5th cup, which is kos Eliyahu, the cup of wine that we leave for Elijah the prophet. So these words are so important that we don't just read them in the text of the narrative of Exodus. We bring them with us every year into the Seder when we say we must see ourselves as if we personally came out of Egypt, and we do that ritually through drinking the 4 cups associated with these 4 words. So that's the game plan. That's the strategy, the specifics. All right. Swift action here. Okay. Direct action, clear, concise action. This isn't a muddled plan. Okay. This doesn't get sidetracked with, well, how am I going to do it? Maybe that's going to change. The 10 plagues not listed here. God doesn't say, I'm going to, we're going to have 10 plagues and this is going to be the first one. This is going to be the last one. No, God gives a nice vision that people can follow and feel themselves part of. Okay, there's like almost a visceral reaction that we have in these words. Like we are part of this. We are being taken out even as we read the words. All right, we're almost through it. The 6th value, which I love, is spark enthusiasm, right? To be a leader, you need to be present, of course. You need to be listening. You have to have a plan, but people also need to listen to you. How do you do that as a leader? Charisma helps. right? Having, but not just charisma in the sense where you're present for the people and they connect with you. So how are you going to even get them to connect? How are you going to get this slave-minded people to connect with God or with Moses? There's the key right here. Verse number 6. God says, say to the Israelite people, God says to Moses, say to the Israelite people, I am the Lord, I will free you from the labors of Egypt and deliver you from bondage. If you look at the English, okay, that's straightforward. The Hebrew is very impressive. I will take you out from under the sivlot, okay, is the oppression from the bondage of Mitzrayim. Now, the Hasidic teachers, and even before that, Rashi hints to it, gives us a bit of a nuance here. Torah masa Mitzrayim, God says that God will take them out from under the burden, means take them out from the encumbrance of the burdens of Egypt. That's nuanced, right? You can feel like you're carrying a burden, all right? But God will be taking the encumbrance of the burden away. There's a Hasidic text that brings this point out a little bit more. The labors of the Egyptians, Sivlot Mitzrayim, even though their work was harsh and brutal, the Israelites nevertheless became accustomed to suffering and bore the yoke and the travail with patience. There's a link here between the word in Hebrew for patience, which means savlanut. Savlanut is linked with the word sevel, to suffer. To suffer. Someone have a question? Okay, so savlanut is have patience, but the root of that beautiful word, to have patience, is to suffer. Okay, so what God was taking them out of was seeing that their suffering was something natural. The Blessed Holy One said, since they no longer fall ill nor sense the bitterness of their fates, they are in great danger and the redemption cannot wait any longer. What happens to people? We endure suffering, right? When we have to bear suffering for so long, it just becomes part of our lives. It's a pain that we just, like an ache that we carry with us. And God is saying here, I'm going to take that, I'm going to make you aware of that ache. So you will have to do something about it, right? Some people get like arthritis in their arm, right? Or something. Yeah, we live with it. God is saying, get that cortisone injection. Do something about it. Make your life better. Recognize you have pain. You cannot live with this pain anymore. So removing the Israelites from the suffering, not just by lifting the suffering, but by making the Israelites realize that they're suffering, okay, is the first step to get them out of Egypt. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk says, the first step in liberation is resistance to slavery. This is so current, right? If you're thinking about sort of current things that are going on for good and for bad in the dynamics of the world, the political world we're living in, on both ends of the spectrum, you could say, that redemption is inconceivable so long as one does not first loathe exile. Moses announced that the Blessed Holy One would take out from their very innards the patience with the Egyptian bondage and its defilements so that they would not be able to tolerate it any longer. This is the foundation from which the redemption grew. I think this is really a fascinating piece here, right? In order to free ourselves, like there was an aspect in the Israelite, in the redemption from Egypt, there was an aspect there that they had to recognize they were enslaved and feel that they wanted to be freed before anything else could take place, right? Before any miracles could take place, they needed to see their situation and choose, right? To, I don't want to say revolt, but yeah, in a way, revolt, to rise up out of the oppression. So that is a piece that maybe we don't focus on, but it's there, it's hidden in the words of the text. Okay, what else? So then Moses, this is verse 9. Moses told this to the Israelites. So then, Vayidaber Moshe Cain El Bnei Israel. So okay, that conversation's over. Moses goes to the Israelites, and what happens? Again, V'lo shamu al Moshe mikotzer ruach ume'avoda kasha. They couldn't listen, right? So we're still in the value here of sorry, I'm coming up here, the value of sparking enthusiasm. Moses needs to spark enthusiasm, sorry for scrolling, among his audience because they had like shortness of breath. They were so heavily burdened that they couldn't even breathe, right? They couldn't even think. They're so stressed out. Like, don't talk to me about freedom. I'm so stressed out, right? So this is what V'lo shamu Moshe. They didn't accept his words of comfort. Why? Because they had a kotzer ruach, a spirit of anguish. Spirit of anguish. And this is Rashi, okay? We're talking about 11th century. If one is anguish, his breath comes in short gasps and he cannot draw long breaths. Yeah, so Julie mentioned in the beginning, I'm a yoga instructor. Okay, so this is interesting to me, right? The ways in which we look at our own selves as an integrated being. The breath work, the body, the spirit, the mind, it's all integrated. Okay, so Siftei Chachamim, it's not because they were short of breath that the Israelites did not accept consolation from Moses. Let's say from. The shortness of breath reflected their state of minds. And in their troubled state of minds, they abandoned hope for redemption. Wow, it's fascinating. So finally, leadership value number 7. Moses goes back. So now we have Moses and Aaron. Okay, Vayedaber Adonai. So this is God's response. All right, our leadership value, allocate resources. God doesn't leave it at that. Like, I guess they're too stressed out. I guess they can't be saved. I guess they really won't listen. God comes back with the plan. Here's what we're going to do. Moses, you clearly can't do this alone. So Moses now added to the, re-added because Aaron was there, but then Aaron dropped out. Now Aaron's back. Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe ve'el Aharon. God says to Moses and Aaron, Vayitzavem el bnei Yisrael. So in regard to the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, instructing them to deliver the Israelites from the land of Egypt. This sentence is pretty straightforward, except when you break it down, it's much more interesting. What's going on here in this one sentence, God is giving Moses the resources that he needs to be successful. Number 1, Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe ve'el Aharon. This is from Rashi. God counters to Moses, okay, you can't do this alone. Moses, make sure Aaron is by your side. So here's Aaron, resource number 1. You're doing this together. You're doing this equally. Vayitzavem el bnei Yisrael is the direction number 2. And this is also from Rashi. God commanded them, meaning regarding them, to deal with them in a gentle manner and to be patient with them. That's from Exodus Rabbah brought through Rashi. Be patient with them. That's resource number 2. Don't give up on them. Find the right words to speak with them, okay? Because yes, they're exasperated, but you need to rise above and find the right way to communicate with them. And finally, the third resource, the El Pharaoh Melech Mitzrayim. Rashi says here, with regard to Pharaoh, treat him like a king. Speak to him with respect. He is, after all, the king of Egypt. Don't just go in there and say, hey, my God's more important than you. Find the right way into the dialogue with Pharaoh, which will be through respect and recognizing Pharaoh's position as a king and giving him that honor. So those were, some 3 final points of instruction and bringing it together as a leadership value, allocating your resources, work with what you have. Finally, just add some supernatural plagues and then go Team Exodus. You got this. 10 plagues to be specific. So that is the text. We are at 11. I have about a minute here to, let's see, some comments.
I can pull from the thread since it's long.
Yes,
there was a question about looking at these qualities vis-a-vis Moses and vis-a-vis the mortal. And if you could speak to the humility of Moses and a speech impediment and how that plays into leadership qualities.
Yeah, and we see that in last week's Parsha, where Moses really doesn't want this job. I mean, he is humble, because he has this speech impediment, and he's worried about that. But God counters. You don't have to do this alone. In fact, when Aaron and Moses are listed in the text, they tend to be listed Moshe v'Aharon, but there are actually times in the text where it lists Aharon v'Moshe, which shows that they're equal in a way, right, on par, as a team, a leadership team, and that they need to counterbalance each other. Neither of them can do the job alone.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Upbin. I know you have to go teach another class now, so we all want to thank you and wish you a Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. I'm curious about this. Thank you so much, everyone. They can certainly feel free to reach out to me to continue the dialogue. I'm sorry I have to jump off. And I'd love to get the texts, the chats. Is that something you could forward to me, or?
I sure can.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I want to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, and I hope to see you again soon.